President, fellows and guests, I'm delighted to be here tonight to talk about medieval commemorative practice. Memoria studies have been well established on the continent since the 1980s, but have hitherto attracted limited scholarly interest in England. The range of commemorative strategies and the variety of means chosen to implement them is a huge subject, deserving comprehensive treatment. Today I can only scratch the surface, although I hope to illustrate the breadth of the subject matter and the utility of documentary as well as material evidence. I will concentrate on memoria in parish churches in England and will be examining the subjects from the perspective of donors, although it is important to recognise that the church and parish community also benefited from their actions. But why does memorialisation matter so much to medieval men and women? On entering Wenhaston Church, visitors cannot but be impressed by the still vividly painted doom which depicts the Day of Judgment, the key centre of action being towards the right-hand side, the encounter between St Michael and the devil. The former has charge of the scales and weighs each soul against his or her unreconciled sins. The person shown in the scales is found wanting and will be handed over to the devil, who will speed him on his way to hell. This is far from the finest surviving doom painting in England, but one aspect that is particularly interesting is that the painting has blank areas where the moonbeam and its accompanying figures would have been before the Reformation. The outline of the lost figures at Wenhaston shows just how dominant the image of Christ on the cross would have appeared. At the close of the Middle Ages, such scenes would have been very familiar, probably in every parish church, providing a message that carried resonance for every man. All would die and all would be judged, but there was still the hope of salvation. In one sense, the outcome was ultimately a decision for God, but the medieval faithful strongly believed that an individual's fate could be influenced by his or her own actions. This is the context within which strategies for commemoration have to be understood. The Christian faithful were taught that one of the surest ways of achieving salvation was good works in the community. This was translated into practice in various ways, not just the traditional seven corporal acts of mercy, as shown here, but also by going on pilgrimages, providing education for the poor, mending roads and bridges, building, improving and beautifying churches, involvement in guild culture, establishment of chantries, and much, much more. All these actions were regarded as being good for the soul. Medieval man also believed that the refining process of purgatory, through which all souls must go, could be speeded by the offer of prayers by the living faithful. This is succinctly summarised in John Lydgate's Pilgrimage of the Life of Man of 1430, Prayer, Abrogation, Purgatory. These prayers were sought in a wide variety of ways. All too often, the only material remains indicative of the heavy expenditure once undertaken to speed the soul of the deceased through purgatory are two monuments, chantry and guild chapels, and painted glass, screens and walls. Few of them are as in good a state of preservation as the chantry chapel built to commemorate Richard, Earl of Warwick, in the Collegiate Church of St Mary, Warwick. Richard Beauchamp's magnificent gilt cast copper or alloy effigy remains the centrepiece, despite the addition of later two monuments to his descendants, while the windows still glow with glass of outstanding technique and quality. Too often, however, chantry chapels are in a damaged state, with few of their original motifs remaining. Moreover, only a tiny proportion remains, for example, of the medieval plate and textiles paid for by the pious members of medieval society, with the aim of attracting prayers for their souls. For such categories of memoria, we have to turn to the documentary record. Wills will be my main source tonight, even though they authenticate religious provision only at a single point in a person's life, and that's when they are facing death and judgment, and may be thought to be most likely to see the advantages of making provision for eternity. It is much more difficult to document the equivalent provision made in the rest of a person's lifetime, although donors of artefacts may be listed in our church inventories. The benefaction lists in the church book for All Saints Bristol, for example, show how succession, parishioners and the clergy strove to provide ever richer fittings and furnishings for the parish church. What was provided for in return is explicit in this case. The names were committed to the corporate memory as the parish undertook that the benefactors should not be forgotten, but have in remembrance and prayed for of all this parish that now be, and all of them that be to come. And an annual general mind was celebrated for all such good doers. Some testators were evidently keen that prayers for their soul should begin as soon as possible after their death. William Sweatman, Mercer and former Mayor of Norwich, requested 4,000 masses to be said immediately after his death. To have carried this out in full in, say, 28 days would have required 143 priests to celebrate every day. The bequest may well have been aspirational rather than realistic. The urge for speed extended to other types of bequests. Thomas Gatley died in 1440 at Great Lytton near Suffolk, made his bequest of 10 marks towards the building of this new church tower of the Church of Great Badham in Suffolk, conditional upon the parishioners setting the work underway and preparing the materials within a year after his death. While John Roper died in 1527 of Canterbury, Kent, requested that the east window of the north side of St John's Hospital, Canterbury, be glazed with such images or pictures as I show unto my executors, and that to be done within 2 years after my decease. The glazing was duly carried out in 1529. One explanation of the desire for haste might be extreme fear of purgatory, but another, perhaps more pragmatic reason could be that those concerned were confident that they would in time be released from purgatory, and therefore that prayers said speedily were more likely to be effective in their intent. It should be noted, however, that such cases requesting the need for speed are a minority, with most commemorative strategies being intended to attract prayers over an extended period. Occasionally, testators were surprisingly relaxed as to how their money might be best be invested in order to attract prayers. James Badham, who died in 1513 of Breen, Sussex, bequeathed to the parish 40 shillings to help to the buying of a vestment thereof be bestowed thereof, and if the parishioners will not bestow it to that intent, then that I will that 20 shillings thereof be bestowed in reparation to the highways within the parish of Breen, aforesaid, whereas most need shall be seen. These alternatives may seem surprisingly different to us, but to the testator, they were just different forms of memoria, either of which would benefit his soul. This is made explicit in the case of Alexander Kirk, died in 1528 at Manthill, Bedfordshire, who directed that money should be distributed in meritorious and charitable deeds as to poor people, mending of highways, and otherwise, as should be thought most expedient for his soul, those of his wife, parents, and all Christians. These, however, were again exceptional sorts of cases. Most of those who made pious provisions in their wills knew exactly what they wanted, some in setting out provisions in considerable detail. The most Common pious bequest in wills was the provision of lights at altars and religious images and inclusion in the parish bead roll, all of which required just a few pence of expenditure. Such minor bequests are otherwise largely unrecorded, although the tailor William Chapman recorded on his modest inscription brass his obit and the monument candle to be burnt perpetually before Blessed Sacrament at the high altar of Little Missenden. Some masses for a limited period could be funded for rather more, but the wealthier the person, the greater the variety of opportunities that were open to them. Examples from different ranks in medieval society will illustrate this, as well as providing further evidence of a wide range of memoria. An outstanding example of one who adopted as many as possible of the options open to him to attract prayers for his soul was the merchant of the stable of Calais, Thomas Robertson, who lived in ALGARKIRK near Boston. He had two brasses laid down from memory, but like many others, his two monuments were only a tiny part of his commemorative strategy. He was a member of several of the Boston religious guilds, notably the prominent guilds of the Blessed Virgin Mary and Corpus Christi. In his will, Thomas made extensive and explicit instructions for his remembrance. Immediately following his death, 1,000 masses were to be said for his soul, and the arrangements for his funeral were lavish, with attractive inducements being provided for clergy to attend the event, their prayers being regarded as especially efficacious. He directed that provision should be made for hobbits at ALGARKIRK in the rood chapel he'd built as a former family chantry chapel and at nearby Clonsdyke. These and many other local churches received money for the upkeep of their fabric and specific requests of vestments and plate. Significant sums were directed to the support of the Boston-based religious guilds, all the Boston friaries, and religious houses, including those as far away as at Lincoln, Walsingham, Canterbury, and Calais. As we've seen, charitable deeds would also earn Thomas credit. So 12 poor men were each to receive black garments and a payment of 4pence to their torches at his burial day, 7th day, and 30th day. The sort of bedesmen shown here. On the same occasions, every man, woman and child in ALGARKIRK and Clonsdyke were to receive 2pence, and £11 was distributed each time to the poor and bedridden of 11 local villages. Other beneficiaries of his will were poor maidens on their marriage days, poor people willing to take up the priesthood but having no friends to help them, the Laser House in Boston, the orphans of St. Catherine's Church outside Fort Lincoln, the prisoners within Lincoln Castle that lie for lack of payments of their fee and have no friend to help them, and to the priests and scholars in the universities of Cambridge and Oxford to preach and teach the Word of God. Finally, he left funds for mending and maintaining the common highways and bridges of ALGARKIRK and Clonsdyke, the repair of Dyke Bridge in Boston, and repairing of the highways there. Thomas Robertson clearly planned to cover all his bases in his search for salvation. Moving up the social scale to the gentry. Sorry, some slide, something has gone wrong. No, there it is. Oh, sorry. Social scale to the gentry. Over a period of over 100 years, 5 generations of the Stephen family of Morley made generous provision for their souls, including commemoration by a series of prestigious London-made brasses, some with overt intercessory imagery, as shown here. The inscriptions reveal that they were major benefactors of their parish church and made significant improvements to the fabric, including building the spire. The brass of John Stapleton records his gift of 3 bells to the church and a bequest of 3 and 4pence yearly for bread for the poor. John appears to have been genuinely pious. The year before his death, he entered into an agreement with the prior of Bredsall Priory for an annual mass for himself, his wife, his parents, and his grandparents. In addition, there is another brass in the church, dating from the end of John's life, listing the prayers to be said for the various members of his family. Their names were doubtless entered into the parish beadhole, but the position of this brass above the piscina near the high altar demonstrates that its purpose was to act as a permanent obit reminder to the priest when he celebrated Mass. Perhaps one might say an altar cue in brass. This is not the only striking feature of this particular example. The text of the inscription concludes, John Statham ordained that this be said, and more written in divers books. Remarkably, one of these books survives as another instance of the diversity of memoria. The Statham Hours in the Derbyshire Record Office at Matlock include prayers from the Office of the Dead with the names of the same members of the Statham family inserted. The more costly strategies of knights are typified by Sir John Burgate, Lord of the Manor of Burgate, and his wife Eleanor. There is evidence that this couple was also sincerely pious and much concerned as to the fate of their souls after death. They procured a papal indult in 1397 so that they might be granted plenary remission by their confessor as often as they pleased. On entering Burgate Church, the first artefact to be seen is the font. Although badly damaged by a iconoclast, it was clearly once a fine example. But what marks it out, I think, is the base, which bears an incised inscription, which reads in translation, "Pray for the souls of Sir William Burgate and Eleanor, his wife, who made this font." The chancel is dominated by a tomb chest, which is set immediately in front of the altar. The brass which tops the tomb chest is a very fine product of the London Bee workshop, choice of the great and good at this time. Finally, the couple's arms are also to be seen on the decorative top band of the piscina in the chancel, marking it out as another of their pious donations. This example also highlights another significant aspect of strategies of memorialization, namely that some requests are, so to speak, captioned to ensure that the donor's identity was not overlooked. Clearly this couple weren't taking any chances, but were putting their stamp of ownership on all their artefacts in the church aimed at securing this intercession, with, in their case, the tomb monument as the main focus for devotion. At the other end of the scale for the major donors, large numbers of parishioners might contribute to a parish building project, as with the church at Long Melford, which was rebuilt between 1460 and 1490. This is an especially well-known and heavily labelled building, with 7 building inscriptions in total on the exterior, many attributing different parts of the build to specific donors. The church at ISOBEL received a nuclear story and angel roof at the end of the 15th century, as shown in the bottom. An inscription on the wall plate asks for prayers for the good estate, a formulation often used in people's lifetimes, of Christopher and Elizabeth Payton, and for the soul of his father, Thomas Senior, and Mother Margaret, which did make this roof in the year of our Lord, 1495. This roof. The paint is now faded and the wood darkened, but originally it would have been much more legible to the congregation and the clergy. At Closworth, the west side of the tower has 2 figures high up either side of an elaborate niche, while the south side has a man and woman in costume of the early 16th century. They undoubtedly commemorate major donors, the names of whom are now lost to us. More easily visible is a stone panel over the porch of Sherburn St. John with the inscription, "Of your charity, pray for the souls of James Spire and James' wife, which caused this porch to be made at their cost in the year of our Lord, 1533. Above the inner door is a badly damaged monument with another inscription to the couple. This would have ensured that all those entering the church would have been encouraged to pray for them. Lest this assessment of the intended audience of commemorative inscriptions be thought unduly simplistic, I should ask that there is another aspect to them. It's difficult to understand how some of these inscriptions could have been read and acted on before the widespread availability of binoculars. But not all building inscriptions were intended to be seen by an earthly audience is strikingly illustrated by this pair of painted medieval stones found buried deep beneath the foundations of the medieval Guildhall Chapel in London. They had originally been placed at the bottom of the medieval foundation trench, with the painted surface placed uppermost. In this case, and for some others, the intended audience could only have been God. As some of my earlier examples indicated, a particularly popular way amongst the better off to endow more and better church fixtures and fittings was glazing windows. Its popularity, as with other associated types of memorial, can probably be accounted for by the scope offered for labelling with identifiers of the donors. Being such a striking feature of the church's decorative scheme, it may also have served as a further purpose, the one which I've so far emphasised, intended not just to ensure the pious could know whom to pray, but also as a very worldly means of self-glorification. This such cynicism is not a new insight, but vast sums of money that were expended on such works were perhaps intended to the glazed glory of the givers as much as to exalt God, was highlighted in Piers Plowman's Creed. Then I went up to see the church and beheld it immediately, wonderfully well built with wide windows, fashioned and inscribed with many names, shining with coats of arms painted in the glass, with merchants' marks placed in between, more than twice 20 in number. There is no herald that holds such a role. This practice is amply illustrated by documentary and material evidence. John de Beverley, a London priest who died in 1380, left 40 shillings for alterations to the glazed windows in the Church of West Greenwich, Buckingham Hill, and Stoke Church, on condition that a shield of my arms be placed in any window painted. Richard Harry, died in 1524, Vicar of Stowe, Buckinghamshire, asked to be depicted in the porch window, having a chalice in his hand with my name writ under the foot for a remembrance. Such identifiers are reasonably frequent in medieval stained glass. The south window of the South Chapel at WATERPERRY contains donor images and the inscription, "Pray for the souls of Walter CURSON and Isabel his wife, whose goods as the roof of this church and the roof of this the Lord's, he and the covering the bed of all this, also the same window were made." More paintings and religious images provide many of the same advantages to the donor as I have exemplified the same class, in that heraldry, donor figures and associated texts can be incorporated in any scheme, primarily focused on religious imagery. Yet there are major problems in interpreting the probate evidence, since many references are ambiguous, especially those for the painting of a saint, which might mean the colouring of a carved devotional image rather than a wall painting. Although few extant carved religious images survive, the damaged seat of mercy Trinity from Brighton Gordon, flanked by donor figures of an armed man and a lady, perhaps Philip de Limbury and his wife, show that these two could be funded by parishioners. Two Northamptonshire wills typically the ambiguity of requests for images. T. Gibbard, died 1518, directed, I bequeath to paint St. Loy and St. Modlin in Cottesgrove Church. And Arthur Southern, died 1518, of Higham Ferrers, gave 13 shillings and 4pence to the painting of St. Anne in the choir. In neither case is there any other documentary reference to these saints in the specified church which help clarify matters, nor does either church retain any medieval war paintings. Sometimes, however, the bequests are sufficiently specific. A wall painting was definitely referred to in the will of Thomas Pellet, died 1519, of Stayne in Sussex, who directed, I will that my picture and my wife's and my children shall be painted in the back side of the wall behind the rood. There are also some unambiguous references to carved devotional images. Peter Walpole, died 1485, who was buried in St Andrew, Holborn, London, before the image of St Ethelreda, bequeathed 5 marks to the making of a new image of St Ethelreda, not painting, making, with the painting and other necessaries to her longing, and more money if needed. And I will be writ under the foot, Orate pro anima Petri Walpole. Song masses were to be sung in front of her altar for a year in his name. Clearly Walpole anticipated that every person praying to St Ethelreda's image on their own behalf, or that of someone close to them, would add a prayer for him. Additionally, he may have hoped that each time Ethelreda received a prayer, she might intercede on his behalf. Turning to surviving war paintings, some schemes include references to donors. The Church at South Newington retains a remarkable array of war paintings, including St James the Great, the kneeling figure of a male donor. A male figure also appears together with a woman as donors for an adjacent image of the Virgin and Child. The 3 leopards of the Giffard's arms are displayed in the pedestal on which the Virgin stands. There is some dispute as to the identity of the donors, but the fact that the paintings probably date from the 1330s indicates that these images are most likely to represent Thomas Giffard and his wife Margaret Mortain. In all probability, Thomas Giffard is also the man kneeling before St Michael in the church. Quite possibly he might have paid for all 14th century paintings there. The inclusion of the name Saints Margaret and Thomas in the wall painting scheme reinforces this interpretation. The rood was a key focus of devotion in the church and its upkeep important to the congregation. Its liturgical significance clearly suggested to those who provided funds that it was a good work that would give them eschatological benefit. Most bequests, the building and painting of roods and rood streets are lacking in detail, although a welcome exception is that of Jane by Countess Lisle, died 1500, whose testamentary specifications for a splendid and expensive new rood at St Michael's, Cornhill, London, are unusually precise. It was to cost £90 and was to include images of Mary and John. She specified, amongst the which works that I shall will that mine executors without delay after my decease shall do to be made and set up 2 scutcheons, the one of them with the arms of my right worshipful husband Robert Drove and mine jointly, to the intent that our souls by reason thereof may be rather be remembered and prayed for. The greatest concentration of root screens donor identifiers is in Norfolk. At ALGARKIRK, there are 2 inscriptions reading in translation: Pray for the souls of Thomas WYMER, Joan and Margaret's wives, and John Janis, of this work the guild was made in the year 1507. WYMER, a wealthy weaver from Worsted nearby, was evidently an important benefactor of this church, with many of his own goods during his lifetime given. The inscription on his brass records that he adorned this church with many of his own gifts during his lifetime and would adorn it after his death and through his charity. He evidently hoped that parishioners seeing either the screen or the brass would offer up a prayer for his soul. Fonts also often had identifiers for, including inscriptions to indicate the donor, other than very few requests mentioning this type of memoria in Wales. And Keso, Bedfordshire, is a rare 13th century example of font with an inscription reading in translation: "Pause, whoever passes by this spot and prays the soul of Warrell, that God by his grace may grant him through mercy. Amen." Fonts with inscriptions clearly identifying the donor can be found in much greater numbers from the 15th and 16th century, for example in Suffolk, including that of 1510 at Hesed, which is a kneeling stone to the west of the Plymouth, upon the three sides of which is an inscription asking for the prayers of Robert Who and Agnes, his wife, who made this font. In northern England, mention should be made of a group of 18 fonts of distinctive design carved from Eggleston marble, quarried over the banks of the River Tees near Badham Castle, most of which probably date from the 15th and early 16th centuries. Unlike the richly carved fonts found in East Anglia and many other parts of the country, religious imagery on them is virtually absent. Instead, the main form of decoration on the bowls is a series of raised shields, often marked by heraldry or merchants' marks, making them a highly commemorative type. The example at Catterick on the left displays the arms of William Burke and his son, William. Some of these fonts have inscriptions, including that at Bolton by Bowland, on a series of brass plates below the shields. These seek prayers for Ralph Huxley, his wife Edwina, and one of their many sons, Ralph, who was rector of Bolton by Bowland Church. If references to fonts and font covers are there, similar probate references to pulpits and lecterns seem almost non-existent. I have been through, I should say, many thousands of bills, mostly printed, looking for this sort of evidence. It means, therefore, that virtually the only evidence of their provision by pious parishioners has to be drawn from extant examples with inscriptions, themselves not to be found in great numbers. At Rossington, Yorkshire, a font supposed to have come from the destroyed Church of St Mary Magdalene in Doncaster has an inscription carved into the cornice around the top of the pulpit reading, "Pray for the soul of Richard Stransall and his wife." Of particular attraction and interest are two wine glass pulpits in Norfolk, which retain their full painted decoration. That at Horsham Faith includes a panel showing a kneeling clerk or priest with an invocatory scroll reading, "Merciful Lady, Queen of Heaven, keep me from deadly sins 7, leading to an image of the Blessed Virgin Mary and Child on a pedestal. Who the donor is unfortunately uncertain. The pulpit has an inscription in Latin seeking prayers for the donor, but only a few scraps, including the date of 1488, remain legible. I suspect it commemorates Thomas Sond, who was recorded as rector there in 1469, the next incumbent on the list being John Mulmer, who occurs in 1404, but it could be someone in between. There's no such uncertainty at Burnham Norton, where two panels feature kneeling images of John Goldale and his wife Catherine, while inscriptions seeking prayers for their souls runs beneath the panels. Although church seating for the congregation was evidently provided for the laity in some churches in the 13th century, it's not until the 15th century that many wills survive which record donations towards pews and other seats. In 1475, William Philpott of Godmersham, Kent, directed that the making of the new seat, called pews in the church of Elmstead, be done at my expense, viz. That the space from the place where St Christopher is painted to the corner of a stone wall on the north side of the church. Rarely is there any detail given of the form of the seats, although John Boards, I think you know one of Pulpit Suffolk, referred in his will to the stool which I did make coloured and garnished with scallops and other signs of St James. Woolpit Church retains some medieval benches, but the ends are carved with animals, not symbols of St James, so Board's stool has apparently perished. Some extant church seats have inscriptions which enable us to identify their benefactors. At Altenham, a bench end carries on a shield held by an angel the inscription Robert Day, maker of this work, and William Boatman, curate, John Hodge, clerk. The form of the script suggests a date of about 1510 to 30. Most writers have assumed that Day was the carver, but I think it's far more likely that all three named were donors. More explicit is the inscription on a pew at Wickmere in Norfolk, which reads Orati pro animamus, John Baron, Isabel Baron, Ralph Isabel. A whole family, therefore, providing pews. Heraldry and other identifiers carved on pews can also help to identify sponsors. At Copplestone, the arms of the Stable family are on two of the bench ends. Initials were another form of identifier, as at East Somerset, which is a bench end with the intertwined initials of John Selwood up to Glastonbury from 1457 to 1493. Other carvings include heraldic devices and reguses, such as at Lopham, the elephant castle, the badge of the Beaumont family, which was associated with the parish from the 1430s and 1460s. Rather more unusual was the testamentary bequest of Nicholas de Stowe, perpetual vicar of Snettisham. He asked to be buried in the chancel of Snettisham Church before the image of the Blessed Virgin, and he left 5 months for making the pavementum fundi of the chancel. Tiles were used for this work were specially commissioned from the local tile factory at Horsley, near King's Lynn. They bear the inscription Orate pro animala Dominus Nicolai de Stowe Vicari. None of these tiles remains in Snettisham Church, probably because the medieval church chancel was dilapidated by the early 19th century and was rebuilt. But some of Nicholas de Stowe's tiles have been found at other local churches nearby, and one has found its way to the British Museum. With each tile on a huge floor, seeking prayers for his soul, onlookers could not fail to be reminded of the donor. Most medieval liturgical textiles have perished, but one extant example is the funeral pole which John Fairy of Dunstable gave to the Guild of St John the Baptist, and which was appropriately labelled to enable the donor family to be identified long after their deaths. The groups of standing figures, the foremost figure in each being identified by an inscription as Henry Fairy, his wife Alice, and their son John and his wife Mary. Bells with merchant mark and the initials IB for John, John Fairy complete the composition. That instant identification of the donor was clearly intended by the bequest of a Bowes, Jane Joan Thurcross, died 1523 of Hull, Yorkshire. She requested, "My executors shall cause a bawdekin or a pall of black velvet to be made to cover the hearse with all in Our Lady Church, and thereupon I will have an image of the Blessed Trinity wrought with gold, and a dead man lying before him in a winding sheet. And at the sides I will have 4 angels wrought with gold and needlework, with candlesticks in their hand, as though they give reference to the Trinity. and my name to be written under the foot of a dead man for a memorial. Draped over the coffin and funerals of parishioners of the churches concerned, these calls provided a repeated reminder of the donor's patronage, in a sense, turning every funeral into commemoration of them too. Plate was another common bequest in wills, and surviving inventories of church goods sometimes note the donor, suggesting that they carried some sort of identifier. Chalices were the most usual type of plates made in wills, probably because of their use at the most solemn part of Mass by the priest, whose prayers would be prompted thereby. The will of Sir Nicholas Twyford, citizen and goldsmith, died 1391, buried at St John's Abbey, London, left a cup of silver gilt to the church to keep him in perpetual remembrance. One rare surviving example, on loan from St Martin Ludgate to the Museum of London, which was the gift of an identifiable individual, was a chalice with an inscription reading, "Pray for the souls of Stephen Peacock and Margaret his wife, which gave this in the worship of the sacrament." Sir Stephen Peacock, a haberdasher and Lord Mayor of London, was buried at St Martin Ludgate. The stem and the base of the chalice were originally part of a box to hold mass wafers, which was bequeathed to the church by Sir Stephen in his will dated 1535. It was made into the communion cup, as it's shown here, around 1559. Although there are a few extant examples of the medieval period, there are a number of other testamentary bequests of chalices with inscriptions just like this. Sir John Barnaby died 1517, Clerk of London, left to the church at Sherborne, a chalice castle gilt weighing 12 ounces, written in the foot, "Jesus have mercy on the soul of John Barnaby," and a convenient vestment priced 40 shillings, making mention of my name in the back thereof, and these to be used by the said priest the space of 1 year, and then to remain to the church for evermore. The inscription of the chalice would have been visible only really to the priest at the taking of the sacrament, other than at Easter when all took the sacrament, but the priest's prayers would be regarded as of a special merit. In contrast, the inscription on the back of the chalice report provided would be clearly seen to be much of the service, prompting general the prayers for Barnaby's soul. Thus Sir John's gifts appear to be very carefully chosen to ensure that both clergy and congregation were reminded of him at every Mass. There are many other such examples demonstrating that the advertising of sponsors, which marks many a sporting and cultural event today, is by no means a modern phenomenon. Even if in the medieval period the motivation behind such advertising was different. The blatant commercialisation of this approach did not escape criticism long before the Reformation. In the vision of Piers Plowman, a poem, part theological allegory, part social satire, written by William Lamland in the late 14th century, Need has an encounter with a confessor, Totes as a fire, who after absolving her from her sins, put to her a composition. "We have a window here being worked on that will cost us a lot. If you would glaze the gable and engrave your name there, your soul will be certain to reach heaven." Reed's response was enthusiastic. "Have mercy, and I will find funds to your church room, provide you with a cloister, have your walls whitewashed and your windows glazed, and have painted a portrait for all who paid for this work, so that every soul shall see that I am a sister of your house." Some may have paid to Lamland and invested their money into charitable good works, which would benefit the community as a whole, or the poor and infirm in particular. But massive sums of money continued to be poured into enriching parish churches, where prayers were more likely to be said for the donors' souls. To sum up, I hope I have demonstrated how many parishioners arranged for a wide range of visual mnemonics to be provided in their parish churches. It is important to recognise that these were not intended to operate in isolation. Their effect would be strengthened by the regular recitation of the donors' names, be it in connection with bead rolls, annual general minds, obits, short-time soul prayers, or perpetual chantries. The two categories of memoria, spoken and visual, thus interacted and reinforced each other over a long period. Successive generations of parishioners will be regularly reminded both visually and orally of the benefactors, with the aim of ensuring that they were paid for long after they themselves had passed from memory. So for all those who have been mentioned in this paper, may God have mercy on their souls.